Good morning. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Today we're going to cover Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 12. And I'm calling this one, The Devil is Cast from Heaven Forever. Our first passage today is eye-opening for those who have not read this chapter before, as it reveals something that might be a little unexpected for many believers. Let's start by reading the first two verses. Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 9 says this, And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. First of all, this is not describing what happened not long after creation, when Satan rebelled against God and was cast out of heaven, along with 1/3 of the heavenly host of angels, who had joined in Satan's rebellion. Instead, John is describing a future event. But again, with God being outside of time, I am stepping out of my intellectual boundaries to speak of God's past, present, or future with anything more than my earthly and completely limited mentality. Based on where in Revelation this passage has been placed, the assumption would be that this occurs during the Great Tribulation, the last 3.5 years. This passage describes a war in heaven. That in itself is quite difficult to imagine. God is all-powerful, omnipotent. God is all-knowing, omniscient. God is everywhere at the same time, omnipresent. Satan is none of those. Satan is a created being, and God has given power to Satan. I think as Christians, we tend to underestimate the power of Satan. We say things like, get behind me, Satan, which is what Jesus said to Peter in Matthew 16, verse 23, after Peter had rebuked Jesus. Hopefully, each of us remembers 1 John 4, verse 4, that says, You are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. God is not a tiny bit more powerful than Satan. He is a whole lot more powerful. But though God dwells inside believers, we often tend to rely on ourselves instead of relying on God when problems arise. It's difficult for me to picture this war. It would seem that the war would end as quickly as God wanted it to end. But God has his own reasons and timing for when this all will end. Most believers are familiar with the Bible verses in Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14 that tell us of Satan and his angels being cast from heaven sometime after creation. We've covered those recently. But we can see Satan in the form of a serpent in the Garden of Eden, up to his same tricks even then. So I'm assuming that when Satan encouraged Adam and Eve to sin, Satan already had been cast from heaven. And when Adam and Eve sinned, Satan seems to have taken over the dominion of the earth that God had given to Adam. But for some reason, Satan still had access to heaven, even though he had been cast from heaven. We can see this in the opening passage in the book of Job. Job chapter 1, verses 6 through 8 says this, Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, From where do you come? So Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it. And the Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? I wonder what occurred when the fallen angels Some of them are probably referred to here as the sons of God, though that might also include the other angels, presented themselves to the Lord. In our study of Revelation, we recently covered Revelation 9, verse 14, where 4 fallen angels who are bound at the Euphrates River and being held until the time of God's final divine judgment will be released and will then kill 1/3 of the earth's population. Certainly, Satan did not bind or imprison his own angels, seemingly high-ranking, but I would assume God bound them, imprisoned them in punishment for sin, and likely egregious sin. In our first passage today, there is a reference to Satan as the accuser of the brethren, which is exactly what he was doing in heaven in the book of Job. In Job, we learned about the hedge of protection. Satan cannot do anything to us unless God allows it. But instead of thinking that everything is coming up roses, we should reflect on what God allowed Job to endure. Again, God had an important purpose to draw Job closer, but it was a very difficult path for Job. What we see in this passage today is a war in heaven led by Satan on one side and Michael the archangel on the other side. We have seen Michael the archangel involved in skirmishes before. In fact, it was Michael who was delayed from getting to Daniel in answer to Daniel's prayers in a battle with the Prince of Persia for 21 days. Certainly, the Prince of Persia was a demon, not a human. In Jude 9, we also can see that Michael battled with Satan for the bones of Moses after Moses died. These two have been waging war for more years than we can count. The word archangel appears only twice in the Bible, and one of those, Jude 9 mentioned above, it refers to Michael as the archangel. Archangel means chief angel, and as Lucifer was the anointed cherub who covers, it could be that Michael replaced Lucifer as the highest ranking angel when Lucifer sinned. The only other verse where we see the word archangel is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16, that says, "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first." Perhaps Michael will announce the rapture. The result of this war in heaven is that no fallen angels will be in heaven again. We see Satan identified as the devil, the dragon, the serpent of old, and the accuser of our brethren, the deceiver, all in this passage. We also see him identified as the prince of the power of the air in Ephesians 2:2, and the ruler of this world in John 12:31, John 14:30, and John 16:11. Many roles, many titles, many descriptions, but only one purpose: to cause others to sin in defiance to God, their Creator. I would surmise that he has read the Bible from cover to cover. After all, he has had many years to do so. Satan knows God and served under him directly. Does he actually believe he can defeat God? It would seem so. 1/2 the world's population has now died, and it seems likely that Satan does not care if those people were on his side or God's side. If on God's side, he despised them, but he likely wants to make sure that those on his side don't decide to turn to God. Don't overestimate his power, but don't underestimate it either. He disguises himself as an angel of light, according to 2 Corinthians 11:14 and 2 Corinthians 11:3. So he will fool a whole lot of people, especially those without discernment. Satan is also the father of lies, according to John 8:44. Is it any surprise that most of the world follows him and will follow him to their deaths in the Great Tribulation? But what we can see from this passage is that in the present, Satan spends time on the earth roaming around like a roaring lion wanting to devour us, according to 1 Peter 5:8. But even now, he also is spending time in heaven, making accusations to God about God's followers. This makes me think of Judas. Jesus knew who would betray him, exactly how Judas would betray him, and still loved Judas, and even had Judas manage the money bag. In the same manner, God knows that Satan is even at this very moment planning an overthrow of heaven. It seems almost ludicrous. It's not going to be a surprise attack, as all of us have been told about it in advance too. But how does God allow access to heaven now to Satan, knowing all the things he has done, is doing, and will do? I guess that tells us just as much about God as it does about Satan. Satan continues to demonstrate the same pride that caused his fall, continuously, repetitively, without ceasing. And God continues to show patience, mercy, and grace to the one who deserves it the least. Though that defeat has not yet been accomplished, Jesus spoke about the defeat of Satan even before the cross. In John 12, verses 27 through 33, Jesus said this, "Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. But for this purpose I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven saying, "I have both glorified it, and I will glorify it again." Therefore the people who stood by and heard it said that it had thundered. Others said an angel has spoken to him. Jesus answered and said, "This voice did not come because of me, but for your sake. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." This he said, signifying by what death he would die. Satan will be defeated and will spend most of the millennium in the abyss, the bottomless pit. But God will release him from his chains for a time at the end of the millennium. Let me explain why, or at least my understanding of why. At the beginning of the 1,000-year rule on earth of Jesus, every single person on this earth will be a believer. But as people alive in the millennium will procreate and continue to populate the earth, every person born in the millennium will still have to make their own choice whether or not to follow Jesus. It is difficult to understand, but some people will choose not to follow him, even when he is ruling on the earth. God will release Satan from the bottomless pit, and once again, Satan will gather his armies and will fight against God. Didn't learn anything at the Battle of Armageddon? Of course, Satan will lose again, but finally will be banished to hell for all of eternity. Okay, let's read the next passage. Revelation chapter 12, verses 10 through 12 says this, "Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, 'Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. How many years have those in heaven been waiting for this? Satan and his demons have finally and permanently been cast from heaven, and the response is exactly what we would expect. Praises to God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The mention here of those who overcame Satan by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony is referring to believers on the earth. As believers, even if we die on earth, we live in heaven. Satan can take much from us, depending on God's hedge of protection, but he cannot take our eternal lives, as we have been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. This passage ends with an encouragement to the heavens and those who dwell in them, as they are rid of Satan, but then warns the earth and the people of the earth, including land and sea. The devil has been cast to earth, and if we thought it was bad before, just wait. He's running out of time in his battle against God, regardless of the number of years he spent planning this battle. It was a lopsided loss even before it began. But he's going to take a whole lot of people down with him. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Have a blessed day.